So we're here with Jane Gilbert. Thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure.
And for those of you who don't know, Jane is, in my mind, one of the resilience heroes. You were a chief heat officer at the end. You just retired. And you were the chief resilience officer for the city of Miami. But even before that, you helped write the original 100 RC proposal for Resilient 305. So maybe just give us a little story about how that came together and where you think the progress has been made.
Yeah,
today.
So it was a really rewarding experience. At the time I was at the Miami Foundation, and Javier Soto and I brought the county and two cities together on a common application, really in conversation with 100 RC about how the cities had tried but not quite gotten over the finish line to become a resilient city the 2 years prior. And the process of creating that strategy, I think, really helped to build and strengthen our social capacity here locally, amongst not just the local governments, but with the universities involved, the community-based organizations, and even building the business case with our business community for resilience, and to help people understand what urban resilience really means, that we can't just look at these independent shocks of a hurricane or sea level rise in isolation from other shocks and stresses, affordable housing and equity issues, or transportation stresses. So I think it really helped people both understand the issues at stake and to come together more to address those. Still a lot of work to be done, but I think we feel very grateful that we had that opportunity.
And in some ways, I've always thought of Resilient 305 as a governance intervention. As like, too often resilience challenges go beyond the administrative boundaries.
Yes.
And we have a very complicated administrative structure here in South Florida, in the country, and really around the world. It's not unique. And Resilient 305 tried to solve that with one county and a couple of municipalities. Do you feel like we're going in the right direction here in South Florida in terms of the governance challenges, or do we feel more fragmented? And how does that compare to what you've seen in your travels around the world now?
Yeah, look, we're going through a more fragmented period nationally and globally, frankly, but certainly nationally and in the state. And so I think Miami-Dade is a reflection of that. I still think that the kind of collaborative glue that we've built is still present and still going forward and moving forward. It has to pivot in new ways. We need to work hard, and we are working hard to reach new audiences that we hadn't reached before, and making sure to bring those stakeholders into the work. But and so we have to do things differently, but I do think that there's some strong foundation. It's hard to get elected leaders to collaborate often. It's similar to independent corporations that might feel competition with each other. So I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge.
And then you kind of pivoted in some ways, becoming the chief heat officer, going from looking at resilience in a very holistic way to a more targeted entry point. Maybe talk a little bit about at first, just to put my cards on the table, like Please. At first I hated the chief heat officer concept because like we had spent all this time trying to get folks more aligned around holistic resilience, but I've come to appreciate a good entry point. And heat feels like a really solid entry point to still talk about lots of really interconnected, interdisciplinary, and holistic things.
I have to say, it gave me pause when the mayor asked me to take on this role because of my training as a chief resilience officer. But because heat in particular had been previously underappreciated, underaddressed in this community, and that it was something that was much more universally experienced in the county by a broader swath of a population. I do think it was important to call it out and create a strategy. We did it under the rubric
Right.
of the Resilient 305.
Right.
We did it in the same kind of collective action approach. It's not a county plan, it's a Resilient 305 plan.
Right.
And I think that was very important
Yeah.
as well. I think it's also important that now the county is bringing it under the Chief Resilience Officer again.
Right.
And to send that message that particularly when you talk about built infrastructure, we need to be taking that integrated lens on looking at all the co-benefits you can do, whether it's flood mitigation and heat mitigation, or it's accessibility and affordability.
Yeah.
All of those things need to be brought on, or nature positive. We need to be bringing that under one approach. And so I think it did allow for a different entry point, a new set of audiences, to highlight something that had been underappreciated and underaddressed.
Yeah.
But ultimately it did make sense to bring it under. Luckily, because I had been Chief Resilience Officer and worked so closely with the county before in their resilience office, I think it worked well that we were doing that all along.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that and saw that. And I do want to come back to heat in a second, but maybe just talk about entry points for a second. So
Yeah.
When I was offered the job to be the head of this Climate Resilience Institute, in some ways I also had pause, because I don't always believe in climate resilience. I just believe in resilience. Urban resilience, like things that make communities stronger, make us stronger, regardless of whether it's a hurricane or a heat wave or economic transition or a pandemic.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the resilience lens and approach. But I started to appreciate climate as an entry point for people in South Florida. We're now in a new era where climate is a little bit of a sensitive topic and not necessarily the right entry point. How do you think about, as someone who's like, in some ways maybe doesn't have to wrestle with these issues quite in the same day to day, how do you think about whether dropping climate change is, appropriate given these, or reframing it given these times, or is it really important to continue to keep calling it out? Funding issues be damned.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the answer depends on the context a little bit, but I think we can't deny that we have sunny day flooding and that we have stronger hurricanes and that it's damn hotter than the last 10 years have been the hottest on record, all 10.
Right.
So we can't deny that. So we have to acknowledge those things as we build our city, we build our region, and as we talk about it. But maybe it isn't the lead. Maybe it isn't the lead of the conversation. Maybe it's about, we're coming to your neighborhood to help strengthen it and think about it. And so we look at all the issues facing it, and how do we build resilience in that way?
Yeah.
And certainly increasing flood risk and heat stress is part of it, but maybe it's also transportation and housing issues and job access.
Yeah. I agree, and I think being practical and also thinking about what resonates for people really, I think is going to be really important, and that continues to change a little bit. That feels like a very dynamic space. What's resonating. Let's come back to heat, because this has been the thing that's really has opened my eyes. And one of the things that's really interesting about heat is its intersection with health and public health. And there may be so many opportunities to finance and monetize the benefits of resilience infrastructure through health outcomes. There are interesting things about how heat presents itself in South Florida and tropical and subtropical areas. Talk about the state of play a little bit with respect to heat resilience. Like, where do you think we're at, and where do you think we need to go?
So similar to where we have gotten with overall urban resilience and resilience to sea level rise, I think we've done well to make sure people understand the vulnerability that we have here locally.
In terms of heat.
Yeah. I think there's work to be done because of the lack of accurate data, but it's the public awareness on heat risk and heat safety is just light years ahead of where we were 4 years ago. I think we've done a lot to pinpoint where we can have results, whether it's we've built great partnerships again through the Homeless Trust with outreach to the homeless, or with our employer partners on making sure they understand that heat safety is actually good business practice. Or when we think about housing, affordable cooling is critical to thinking about housing.
Yeah.
I think we've done a lot about that, but we still have so much more to scale the solutions, whether it's on green infrastructure and our tree canopy preservation, or it's the housing and getting blended financing to really address housing finance, or it's really being able to accurately count the heat risk that people are facing, where heat illnesses and heat deaths, how many are being caused by heat. If we are not properly accounting for that, we can't leverage the healthcare solution, the healthcare financing for whether it's housing retrofits or it's changes in a workplace.
Yeah.
We can't leverage it if we can't accurately account for how much it's hurting people's lives.
Just go a little deeper there. Tell us why it's so hard to properly account for heat-related illness and death.
Yeah, that it's really important to understand that. So currently, heat-related emergency department visits, hospitalizations, and deaths are counted by those that are documented as heat exhaustion, heat stroke. And even a heat death caused by heat stroke cannot be counted unless they take the body temperature within an hour of death. And so that is not happening on a regular practice.
Right.
And the hospital or whoever they're referring, if it's an EMT that found someone dead, they have to refer it to the medical examiner as an environmental caused death, not a heart attack or other things. Heat, we know that the largest health impact from heat is heart attacks and cardiac arrests and cardiac induced strokes. We also know that it has complications for COPD, diabetes, triggers pediatric asthma outbreaks. It causes preterm births, which can change the trajectory of that child's healthy life.
Right.
And so its impacts are much greater. Chronic kidney disease. These are not documented as heat-related illnesses, and yet that's the vast majority of what the impacts are. We have in the country about 1,200 documented deaths a year now. It's doubled. So it is going up.
Yeah.
But other studies looking at excess heat-related deaths, it's 10 to 12,000 a year. So it's many multifold higher. And the same is true for Miami-Dade County. We have on average about documented like 10 to 12 deaths a year. And that it also has increased. But when we look at excess heat deaths, it's an average of 600 a year. So it's just multifold higher.
So talk about how do you look at excess heat deaths? You look at heat deaths during the winter when there's no heat, and heat deaths during this
deaths
during the winter.
Mortality during any time, and then during not just during the summer months, but during high temperature days or a prolonged amount of high temperature days, in addition to up to 3 days after, because we know that heart attacks or some of the other outcomes that can cause a death can happen because of exposure 3 days before.
Right. So then just getting our hands around what the baseline is one big step. that we have to go. The other thing I've been interested to hear you talk about over the years is then trying to tag heat mitigation to, and what are the benefits of, say, green streets or
Right.
different color roofs or work,
Right.
or breaks, water breaks, shade structures, all of those different things that might help communities better survive that. And we still don't, because we don't have a baseline, it's very hard to talk about what the value of those mitigations are.
This is where our research partners are critical. They're, that kind of research that both the University of Miami has done, University of Louisville, University of Kentucky and Louisville have done to look at the benefits of tree canopy on heart disease and inflammatory responses in general, on Alzheimer's, on other health, mental health, well-being. That's critical to building the business case. Same with heat safety practices in the workplace. There's been good research actually outside of the U.S. on agricultural workers and the implementation of access to water and shaded rest breaks, and how that has not only reduced negative health outcomes dramatically, but actually improved productivity of the workforce over time. And it's pretty simple and low cost implementations. We need that kind of demonstrated results here in the US.
Yeah.
Right now, the NIOSH OSHA guidance is complicated, and frankly, here in Miami-Dade County, if we followed it to the T, we'd have to shut down a lot of our operations. And because it's so restrictive. And that's not, we don't have the data to back up the need for that. So how do we come up with solutions where we know and that use technology to our advantage?
Yeah. What are some kind of technological innovations that might?
Well, I think one, heat is not just temperature. It's wind, it's solar radiance, it's humidity. So having low-cost wet bulb globe temperature monitors in situ, so you know what the real exposure is.
Right.
Also, it's because everybody responds to heat differently.
Mm-hmm.
Having body sensors, and that brings up privacy issues and whatnot, but I think there are ways to address that and keep people's privacy, but also allow them to get notifications for when their body core temperature gets to dangerous levels, so that you can have adaptive protocols, not just universal across the way, which is not needed.
Right. I love this. I think maybe this is the first time I had heard about this idea that where there are heat protections, you actually get increased productivity. I mean, it kind of stands to reason, but...
Well, if you think about athletes,
Yeah.
right? They have this thing called high intensity interval training, right? Where you actually slow down, take breaks, and then you have more energy. We know this as athletes, that this is how people work better.
Yeah.
So it's true universally for
Yeah.
the workforce as well.
Are there any other big ticket items that, as you know, you've had a real career in community building and, 15 or so years really in resilience building. Are there any other big ticket items that you want to call out for us that you think we still need to work on as we go forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, we've built great social capacity here locally. We know the issues. I think we've done a lot of good pilots as well, whether it's in green infrastructure or it's in the built environment or it's in public engagement and education. But we need to, through policies, through training processes, we need to build that into scalable solutions. And I think we can do better about, as we build infrastructure, better solutions around engaging local stakeholders. We continue to run up against challenges when we don't do that properly.
Yeah.
I think we need to, particularly in our current climate, find market-based solutions and or demonstrate the cost-benefit analysis so that we can get the policies implemented
Yeah.
to make sure we have that long-term value creation that we know we can do, but we need the hard numbers to be able to prove it to the decision makers. And so I think that there's it's around scaling, and we need to work on it.
Yeah. The cost benefit stuff really resonates with me, as you know, and we've been here working on like innovative finance. But I do think that the advent of big data and AI and other solutions might actually help us
Absolutely.
better quantify all of these little benefits that result from street trees or parkland or living seawalls or whatever. And like all of that. It in some ways is like 1,000 little cuts, and so being able to aggregate that in ways that make it monetizable, feel like we're at that precipice.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I think we need to leverage that.
One thing that we've been thinking about, and this goes to your community engagement point, is that if you look at Hurricane Sandy in New York, what Rockefeller funded NYU. And NYU created Rebuild by Design.
Right.
And Rebuild by Design led to all this resilience innovation around, the Billion Oyster Project and interesting park designs, and, the part of the Big U called the ESCR, the East Side Coastal Resilience Project, has just, opened the first phase of it. And that was in part about great international thinkers and ideas and architects proposing this stuff, but it was also really about a bottoms-up community engagement process. And that's a long introduction to say, when the next her big event in South Florida is just around the corner. Is the next Hurricane Andrew might be this year, next year, or the year after, or a massive prolonged heat wave unlike anything we've ever seen, or a marine heat wave.
Heat wave with the power outage.
Right. So, and in that moment, there are these opportunities to think differently, as Rebuild by Design showed us. How would you think about that and react to that? What's a big thing that you think in the months and years after a disaster we might be able to implement?
We need to think differently about where we build and how we build here in South Florida. If it's a hurricane hit, we're going to we'll likely have major storm surge, and that will impact certain areas very dramatically. Areas like a downtown can build resilience so that it can go back to normal pretty quickly. We saw that with Hurricane Irma. It was back online very quickly, even though the storm surge was quite significant there. But other communities that are less dense and may not have the tax base to invest in big infrastructure, we need to rethink, how do we incentivize a different how do we transfer development rights or to higher ground transit, and so that we don't just invest in rebuilding and helping people just get back in harm's way. I think that's one thing that we should absolutely use to our advantage in that, take a painful situation and to use it to our advantage. I mean, if it's a widespread power outage with heat, I think we need to look at micro grids and just grid
energy,
grid resilience,
grid resilience,
more, and sustainable energy. And I think we can't miss the opportunity to really push for that.
I mean, for all the reasons that you know better than I do, of course, heat is like that insidious. It doesn't shock in the same ways, generally speaking, and
very chronic.
Yeah, it's just too chronic. It
like
doesn't
the frog in the heating pot.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel a heat
coming.
till it's too late.
I got two more quick questions. So one is about the next generation. We spend a lot of time educating, really smart, talented kids, and thinking about a career in climate or resilience. So what's your, and that landscape is changing massively, as we all know. What's your advice to those folks? What should they be thinking about?
Well, one, I think they have to recognize this is a long game. Like, we go through periods like now where there's resistance, there's roadblocks, but the work can continue.
Yeah.
Just like the way our climate is changing is not a steady progress. It happens and fits and starts. The same in terms of how we work on mitigating these shocks and stresses. There are moments when we can push forward really fast and we need to be ready for those moments and
Right.
try to create those moments.
Like after a disaster.
And like after a disaster, exactly, we need to prepare for them.
Yeah.
And then there are other moments when you're quietly preparing and figuring out how do you scale, how do you make progress in this new environment, and that can bring innovation. So I think having that long game is really important. I think the other is, I heard from an author recently who wrote a book for chief sustainability officers in large corporations. She had these 5 Ps. And one, the 5 Ps, if you adapt them for government or community-based work, I think are prioritize. It's a big field of things that need to be done. Where can you make a demonstrable difference, both because you've got the value creation you can make, but also maybe the political will. Second, pilots, try things, fail early and fast, that kind of thing, and
Right.
but also demonstrate results so that you can build it. Partnerships, critical, always important. And then once you have those, you really need to work on scale through policies, through processes. At the county, we've had this sustainable buildings program for a while, but in the last few years really focused on training people across departments in the Envision rating system, the LEED, energy and water tracking software, like building the processes so that it becomes the way of doing business, not the going up a hill against or going against the tide.
Yeah. That's really wise. And so, what's next for you? You've retired, but you're not. I'm sure you're not done.
No, I'm not done. I'm not done. I definitely am looking forward to more fun. I'm training for a pretty ambitious hiking trip in Glacier National Park. We're going to spend some time in a family property up on the Connecticut coast with friends and family. But I am part-time doing some consulting, some volunteer work on a national and international level to help advance this work through various entities. Also, probably in the fall, I'll start to look at what locally I can do to maybe get to help local leaders with that very neighborhood-based, community-based resilience building effort. That's something that's always been a real passion of mine, and I felt like at a city and even and certainly county level, it's hard to take the time to just focus in one area over time and get things done.
Yeah.
We have lots of plans.
Yeah.
We have lots of strategies, but
Right.
how do we actually see this stuff implemented and see it through?
Narrow the aperture a little bit and
Yeah.
like really
Yeah.
put the nose to the grindstone. Yeah. I mean, that's the tension of having a big job and a broad job or a deep job in some ways. Yeah. Well, Jane Gilbert, thanks for coming to talk to us at the Climate Resilience Institute, and we wish you all the best, and we're we'll still call you from time to time.
Great, I hope so. Thank you.